a baseball analogy, he came up to bat with the bases loaded at the end of the World Series, and he hit a home run. His last day, it was amazing. I've not seen anything like it before. I need to give you a little bit of background on how we got to that last day with that home run. It's God's fingerprints. The Lord's fingerprints are just all over it. He died at the Pastor's Advance down at Twin Rocks Friends Camp. That's an event that's been going on for 30-some years, probably even before Lee was in the mission. Lee had never been to that event. Others have asked him, and for the last 15 years, I've hosted it, and I've asked him. You know, he's just so busy with his ministries on the weekend, he just couldn't break away. And he was so faithful. He didn't break away from that which he felt was so important, to minister to all those people he was ministering to. Last fall, it was probably in early December, I had a meeting with the man who was going to be the speaker this year. I hadn't met him yet. A good friend of mine had recommended his name, or I wouldn't have known to ask this man. It was Jim Carlson, who's the president of Montana Bible College. And he was in Portland for a few days in early December. And so we had a lunch together, and as we were talking, I said, have you heard of our mission? Are you aware of In-Faith or American Missionary Fellowship? He said, oh yeah. I said, I know several missionaries with your mission, and one couple really well, Lee and Irene Britton. And I said, you know Lee and Irene? He said, oh yeah. I said, they all shared a house years ago about in seminary years. I guess there was a 3-story house and 2 young couples and a single guy, and they each had a floor, each crew. A couple on a floor, and a single guy, I don't know if he was in the middle or he was in the middle. So I said, wow. He said, you know, and so Jim asked me, he said, well, do Lee and Irene come to this event? I said, oh, I wish they would, but they've never come. I've never been able to pull Lee out from his ministry. He just is so faithful. But I said, I'm going to make a fresh try. With you and your wife coming, maybe this will be the year that Lee and Irene will actually come. And so I called up Lee. He wasn't home. Irene was answered the phone. I explained what it was about. And the next time I found out that Lee had talked, and Lee was excited about coming to the event for that weekend, which was January 29, 30, 31. So that was the first thing that God did, was to bring in this guy I never met, who was a long-time friend with Lee and Irene. So then I'm thinking about it, and I thought, you know, there's going to be a lot of pastors and people in ministry there for that weekend, and a lot of them don't even know Lee, because he's always been busy, and he's so been busy in his field that he isn't widely known. He should be, but he wasn't. So I thought, we had 4 sessions planned over the weekend. I thought, if we could slip another session in, I'll create an opening for Lee to share what he's doing. And as I thought about that, and I thought about where Lee came from and where Irene came from Salem and Montana, and I thought, that's an interesting thing. I think it would be good if we all could hear how God took a Salem boy and a Montana girl and got him involved in intercultural ministries for all of these years with these different people groups right here in Portland. I'd like to know I wanted to know, what exactly did God do to bring this about? And I think a lot of people would like to know. So I asked them, could they work up a presentation that not only talked about their ministry, but how did God get them into that place? Because the people that are going to be there are people that influence a lot of other people. And people about, I don't know what to do for my life, or I think I want to go on missions or something. I don't know if I should leave Portland or whatever. And so they prepared this. The week before the advance, Lee came over to one of our churches and I was there, and the other man that knew Jim Carlson was there, to kind of go through his presentation that wasn't supposed to be more than 45 minutes. You're laughing. It went quite a lot longer. And my friend called me up that evening and said, Alan, I don't think Lee can do it. that short. So we secretly made a plan. I planned and I reworked the whole schedule that morning to give more time, but I didn't tell Lee. I told Irene, but I didn't tell Lee what was going on, because I thought, I don't know if it's going to take an hour 10, an hour 15, but I wanted to do it. And he actually did 45. He was exactly on when he did his presentation. It surprised everybody that knew it. So that morning, he came to give his presentation. Oh, the other thing is, this year of all years, the weekend we have is set by Twin Rocks Friends Camp. It's always been the first weekend in February and also Super Bowl weekend. And before this one came out, they said, Alan, we're going to have to put you 1 week earlier this year. 1 week. And so we were 1 weekend earlier than we've ever been or ever expected to be. Well, now we know why. So Lee prepared, he came to this event, and he had put this PowerPoint together. Now, I really wish we had taped Lee, because he just looked at the pictures and talked. Well, I can't do that. Irene has helped me she wrote out quite a bit. As I've gone through it, I realized it's not completely aligned the same way the pictures are. And I tried to rework some of it, and so I don't know how this is going to go. It's not going to go as well as when Lee did it. I will tell you one thing that God also did. This year at this Masters Advance, we had the largest turnout in history. And the session that Lee had on Saturday morning, we had extra people come in. So that one session was the greatest attended of any in the entire history of 30-some years of this event. I didn't do that. The Lord did. The Lord wanted many people to see this presentation. I cannot do it justice, but I will do what I can. So if you'll be kind, and I will try to coordinate with Dave, and if I don't signal him, we don't have a clicker. You might be able to tell even by what I have to read where we are at, but I'm going to read from, this is kind of from Irene's memory and mine a little bit too, from what Lee actually shared. We don't have all that he shared, but we'll do the best we can. But you will see everything that we saw, and some of the really key points I think will come across very strongly. When Lee and Irene were asked to share how they ended up serving cross-culturally over so many years, they began to reflect upon their lives and what influences there had been. The word odyssey came to their minds, which can be defined as any extended wandering or journey. Like the children of Israel, God doesn't always take his children on a direct path from A to B, yet he always knows the right paths to reach his intended purpose. Lee and Irene put together a PowerPoint entitled An In-Faith Odyssey in Cross-Cultural Ministry to present at the 2016 Pastors Advance at Twin Rocks Conference Grounds at Rockaway, Oregon on January 30th. This is that presentation as best as can be remembered, since Lee had not written anything down. Lee's early influences include attendance at a small church which held a missionary Sunday every month. Lee kept his Bolivian currency. He kept his Bolivian currency. He was so impressed that the missionaries were handing out money to everyone at the church. And much later he realized that this bill was worth almost nothing. Their currency isn't quite like ours. Lee's parents had an interest in other people. His mother began hiring Eskimo girls from the Chimawa school to help clean her house, since she ran a daycare from her home. These parents began to wonder what Eskimo kids did on Sunday. Did they go to church? These parents went to the school and discovered and followed the procedures to obtain permission to pick up the kids from the Chimawa school and transport them to and from church every Sunday. On a normal Sunday, they would all walk to the Britton home after church for a meal. Sometimes 25 kids joined their family. The Eskimo kids joined in with whatever Lee and his brothers were doing: skateboarding, kayaking, throwing the football, or playing pool. During these years, Lee was also impacted by the death of the 5 missionaries that were killed by the Alca Indians in Ecuador, the same Indians they were trying to reach. Lee joined the Navy and followed advice to go to sea and see the world, and also look up missionaries or churches when he was in port. While in the Philippines, he took an opportunity to be flown by a missionary aviation pilot to visit former headhunters on northern Luzon Island. Lee later went to Brazil, where he traveled up the Amazon River to help for 6 months with construction at a Wycliffe missionary base. Irene grew up in a Christian home as well. Hey, good job. On a dryland wheat farm out of Choteau, Montana, near Great Falls. Besides the culture of farming, she was influenced by the cowboy ranch culture, the Hutterites, and Blackfeet tribe of Native Americans, as well as a culture of being small town of only about 2,000 persons. Irene was also impacted by mission Sundays and projects at the church her family attended, as well as by her aunt Jerry's hosting missionaries from other countries. Irene was 6 when she chose to believe and receive Jesus as her Savior, a most definitely living and risen Jesus, leaving her with a deep impression that she owed him her life. In college, Irene became involved with Campus Crusade for Christ, and her walk with the Lord deepened. Irene never saw herself being on a staff at a college with Campus Crusade because she was a teacher. When Campus Crusade began the Agape International Ministry of sending tent makers, Irene ended up on a team that went to Tehran, Iran. Her time there teaching at the Henry Martin International Elementary School was cut short by intense Ramadan, which led staff to take a trip to visit other staff in Egypt while letting things cool down in Iran. While in Egypt, the Shah left Iran and they were not able to return. Irene settled in the Seattle area knowing that there were a number of ethnic groups, including Iranians, and perhaps God would give her a continued ministry with internationals. God did that by leading her to Lee, whom she married and became a part of the Hmong ministry in Portland. At Western Conservative Baptist Seminary, Lee was made aware over and over again, particularly in his Pentateuch class, that God has a special concern for the widow, the orphan, and the alien, and that his people need to share that same concern. Keep here for a moment. On January 30th, as Lee shared, when he came to this slide, and if you read those words in red, that's where the tears started rolling down my cheeks. And they continued to for that whole session, and on and off throughout that day, including the time I spent about an hour and a half talking to Lee in the little coffee shop. But it wasn't just me. I looked around the room, and I began to see others with tears. I don't know how many, but I wasn't the only one. There was numerous ones who were feeling exactly as I was, touched by how God touched Lee. But how God touched Lee, he's supposed to be touching us too, with this same concern for the orphans and the widows and the aliens, the sojourners that live amongst us. While finishing up at Western, Lee was assigned to a children's ministry as a service project while attending the Christian and Missionary Alliance Church. This was not the type of ministry that Lee had pictured for himself, but he accepted it. I don't think he was looking to be a children's teacher, but he was faithful when that's what he was given. When a group of Hmong approached the church asking that their children be brought into the American culture through the church, Lee was happy to take the children. One week, I remember Lee telling us this. One week he had 20 pale faces with mostly blue eyes. And the next week he had close to 80, 60 of which to him looked alike. God raised up a team to provide transportation, materials, more teachers, and one couple brought Bibles for all the children. I think there's a video about that. There's a 7-minute video that was put together about the Hmong by a missionary. Was he from Portland? Did he do it?
Portland, Oregon, a beautiful, thriving city of 400,000 people. A city that is centered in a much larger metropolitan area of 1.25 million people. Its clean buildings and green waterfront parks are a delightful sight to the visitor. But a city is more than buildings and parks. A city is people. People from many different backgrounds and stratas of society. The upper class live in the more affluent areas of the city, while the middle class has found its niche in the suburbs. A closer look at Portland reveals an inner city of many people tucked away in cramped apartment complexes. While these people are from mixed ethnic and religious backgrounds, they share in common a concern for their families, their own dignity, and a sense of survival. One such group are the Hmong refugees from Laos.
Hidden for centuries in the remote mountainous areas of China, the Hmong or Hmong, previously referred to as the Miao or Miao, came into Southeast Asian countries such as Laos, and they tenaciously kept their own ways of life. Their colorful costumes distinguished them, but even these styles of dress and ornaments varied from place to place. Little known to outsiders, they, however, greatly intrigued the very few that got to know about them, whether they were old or young. The Hmong retained their worship of spirits or animism as evidenced by these neck rings. Varieties of turbans and several types of silver neck rings, coupled with smiles, made one want to know more about their ways. And industrious people, enduring many hardships, they successfully kept their own identity as a minority in northern Laos. Known in Laos as the Highland Lao, the Hmong way of life was preserved in the higher mountains of Laos. Such altitudes made life hard, although in peaceful-looking settings. Fields on steep hillsides were cultivated by hand tools and back-breaking toil.
Now let's see how old traditions have continued in America. Here's a sampling of how American Missionary Fellowship is touching the lives of the Hmong people in Portland, Oregon, through the ministry of Dana and Dee Haynes and Lee and Irene Britton. don't think through how deceitful it is and how tricky it is and how it can catch us and have disastrous results in our life.
The lady lied to those two men.
What is it? Okay, go ahead, tell what happened.
And those two men doesn't know it.
Yeah.
And the lady said, we don't they saw those two men going over there, and she lied today, and that lady takes the window.
What does that mean to us?
To make us
Remember the red road houses remember who?
Brings the people in the crowd, and the Pharisees or the religious leaders heard some of the people talking about him, saying that this was Christ, and that just really bothered them because they knew that if Christ was to increase and become more popular, then they would have to decrease and become more unpopular, and they did not like that. The Pharisees or themselves didn't really have authority to arrest somebody, so they got the chief priests of the Jewish nation, and they got them on their side, and so the chief priests sent some officers to arrest Jesus.
They said they told him that I should have told him and I should have decided if I think on that, if they got it for each other, maybe they're not right.
Our primary goals are to see the Hmong church develop into a strong indigenous church with the preaching, teaching, and training done by qualified Hmong leaders. Secondly, to prepare Hmong young people for Asian ministries around the world. And lastly, to encourage the local Hmong church towards spiritual maturity, that they might be a testimony of God's love and grace to Asians and non-Asians in the Portland community.
Dave's been doing a great job. I was supposed to signal him, but I hadn't done it once, so he just stayed really with it. The Britton's ministry with the Hmong spanned many years and many diverse activities, from the basics of how to function in American society, such as how to use a phone, a stove, normal things to us, to helping families purchase their first home, to Bible studies with women, with men, and with youth. They also came alongside older Hmong who had needs, but were more isolated by language and inability to get around. Have you seen the kids yet? Lee has something to say for every picture. I don't. My next thing here are the Britton kids. I'm waiting for Britton kids. He'll catch up. Who grew up, there we go, who grew up with the Hmong. The Hmong kids and families were regularly included in their lives. Birthday parties, backyard barbecues, camping, trips to the Firs and to the log house. Caleb and his wife are in ministry with youth at the church they attend. She and his wife serve in the Portland Hmong Alliance Church. Lee took a special Laobok teacher course to teach people how to read English, and spent about 4 years with several men who had a desire to learn to read so they would be able to read the Bible. They were all good businessmen, but unable to read. Lee was also good friends with George Chrisman at Bonita Church, and while visiting him realized that a stone's throw from the church was a large apartment complex with Hispanics in it. The transitions from the Hmong ministry, and you'll see slides of some of these ministries. We can go through those and catch up to where I was reading, I think. The Mien youth, they brought right up to the Bonita Church to work with the Hispanics children. So they were all coordinated together. Is that Lee? I think that's about where I was reading. As a ministry, I missed something here. So over time, with other assistants, Lee helped Bonita Church open its doors to a Hispanic ministry. Lee couldn't continue his involvement with that ministry due to a bypass surgery. As ministry came to an official close with the Hmong, not that relationships and time spent ended, but the official ministry closed, then doors opened to work with a small Mien congregation meeting at the facility of Gateway Church. Lee and Irene were delighted with 4 men who made it through all 6 books of the life of Christ, a theology by extension course by SEAN Publishing. What is that? Okay. Okay, good. Well, we've got all but one letter, so we almost win. But Lee and Irene were delighted with, okay, I did that. It is highly recommended, this course, and is available in several languages, but not Mien yet. Is it still not available? Currently, I may not get this name right, Cao Kui, who completed the course with Lee, has taken a college student, Calvin, through the course. The Mien are distinctly different from the Hmong in dress, language, food, and church history. Both come from an animistic background, but the Mien have more Taoism from the Chinese mixed into their backgrounds. While the Hmong were reached for Christ as early as 1953, the Mien only began coming to Christ seriously in the last 35 to 40 years. In fact, the entire Bible was only translated into Mien in 2008. Again, the Britton simply tried to serve, teaching children, youth, attending weddings, home worships, and church. Over time, Futong, have we seen Futong yet? I think he's coming up really quick. There. At the far end of the table is Futong. Futong was visited by church leaders as he expressed an interest in Christianity. The day came when he made the decision to stop being a shaman and worshiping the spirits and to turn to Christ. Lee was asked to have a part in taking down the altar to the spirits. Did we see that yet? And cutting the amulets and burning spirit paraphernalia. I think the words are opposite of the 2 pictures. But there's the altar. And the burning of the altar. Note, go to the next one. that's where Lee, and it comes on. Note the rapt attention of Lee's student on the right. I was waiting for that student to come up there. Early in their years with the Mien, they took 4 youth along with their boys to Idaho to help in a VBS at a church there. Kauquay and Jason are a father and son who completed the Life of Christ 6-book series. Cal's life did a 180-degree turn after a series of events in his life. All he'd say about his life before Christ was, "My life was really bad," and his son agreed. Calvin has faithfully attended Lee's class from junior high and on. This was an award Lee gave him on his graduation from high school. These 4 went to Thailand and Laos in May of 2015, having opportunities to sing and preach as well as reconnect with some families still there. By the way, after Lee gave this presentation, our Northwest Director, Gordon Anderson, came up and presented Lee with an award. It's only been given out once before for Christ-centered ministry, and Lee didn't even know about this award. And so that was a big surprise for Lee, and it was our last opportunity to award him, and the Lord caused us to do that just in time. This presentation was made for the pastor's advance, and so Lee challenged the pastors to remember that they each had their own sphere of influence, that they should seek God's leading. God chooses the weak, the small, the ones willing to be used. Specifically, don't be afraid. Lee shared an example of the Salem church who decided to have a joint picnic that only a few showed up at. When the English-speaking people were asked why they didn't come, they said things like, "Oh, they won't like our food. Our kids might misbehave. They might not understand me." When the Hmong were asked why they hadn't come, they said things like, "Oh, they won't like our food. Our kids might misbehave, and they might not understand me." Don't be afraid. Share your relationship with the Lord. His example was of Hmong believers who were so delighted when they discovered someone at their place of employment was a believer. Be willing to learn. For many years, the Brittons and Haines allowed Multnomah students to do their student ministry with the Hmong. Students were assigned a family to befriend. Susan from Connecticut had nowhere to go during Christmas break, so when the dorms closed, she stayed with her family. She was bubbling over when she stopped by the Brittons' home to share how at night was a couple of mattresses together with Dad, Mom, the 3 children, and then Susan all in a row. Love the people. Esther Schmidt's daughter's here, isn't she? She played the piece at the beginning, Marguerite. Esther Schmidt had prayed for the Hmong before they came to the States and was so delighted when some arrived at the Portland C and Christian Missionary Alliance Church. She had Lee clean and paint out her basement where she hosted many a youth potluck and Bible study. When taking her to visit a Hmong when they first had come, she would talk away with rather 1950s language. She would stop and ask if they understood. They would smile, shake their heads no. But eventually, she asked, "Do you understand that I love you?" And they smiled and nodded yes. And as always, Lee was acknowledging others for all and including Dave doing the technology, and he always wanted to acknowledge everybody else. I think that's in the last screen. He acknowledges a lot of people. So it was a blessing for me to work. I've known Lee for a long time. I've only worked with him closely in the last couple of months, these last weeks. And it was very moving to me, and as I began to see what God had actually put in place, more so. So I came up here today in a very unusual thing. For most of my life, I had dry eyes. Today I've had wet eyes and a dry mouth. So, but I'm willing for that.